Um, I just wanted to give everyone a moment to get settled. Sometimes it takes people, we give them a few minutes to get in the
Sure.
room. As everyone knows, we're here to dissect and discuss the Off School Property, which is the LifeWise documentary film that was released not long ago. So that is what our goal is tonight, is to go through that and to get a couple of different perspectives from a couple of different experts on those perspectives. So let's go ahead and we'll probably get started. What do you think, Zach? Should we give a few more minutes?
Go ahead.
Okay, great. All right. So thanks for being here with us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I'm going to go ahead and go around and introduce our expert panel. Zach and I are not going to be included on that. We're from C. You know us. Great. So we have Chris Cavanaugh. Can you give a wave? Hi, there you go. In addition to his 34-year teaching career, Chris was a James Madison Memorial Senior Fellow, the Plainfield Community Teacher of the Year, and a 2008 Indiana Teacher of the Year finalist. Chris received the American Civic Educator Teaching Award in 2006, which is a national award sponsored by the Center on Congress, the Center for Civic Related Education's Teacher of the Year, and received the John J. Patrick Award for Civic Education in 2018. Chris has also been a valued member to dozens of teachers across the country. So we really appreciate that. I'm sorry, a valued mentor to dozens of teachers across the country. And we know they need it. I can't imagine being a teacher right now. So we really appreciate our teachers because it's rough. All right, so we have Douglas Berger. We know Doug. Hi, Doug. Doug is a co-founder of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie. He is also host of the Glass City Humanist podcast and the Secular Left podcast. They're great. They're awesome. Zach and I were on Glass City Humanists, and it was one of the best experiences that I've had with all of this. It was really great. I really enjoyed it. He also serves on the board of Toledo Integrated Media Education, and that operates WAKT 106.1 FM, which is Toledo's community radio station. He first got active in the secular humanist movement as a member of the humanist community of Central Ohio, where he served as newsletter editor from 1996 to 2007, president in 2001 and 2002, and many other smaller roles over the past 20 years. HCCO named Douglas their Humanist of the Year in 2013. He also served as co-chair for Secular Coalition for Ohio from 2013 to 2018. Doug has been around. He knows his stuff from top to bottom, as you can see from his long resume. We appreciate you being here so much, Doug, and you as well, Chris. RJ Jackson, can you wave? Hi, RJ. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate you. RJ is a filmmaker and a progressive Christian. So he's really bringing a unique perspective. I'm excited for it. And he's the founder of I Have a Guy Productions. His film, and Justice for All, examines the blurred boundaries between faith and government in small town America, revealing how local struggles reflect the national fight to preserve the separation of church and state. Could that movie description be any closer to our fight and our goals? I don't think so. It's really crazy. It blows my mind. I'm very much looking forward to seeing that when it's done. Again, we appreciate you guys all being here. And Zach, do you want to get started with the panel itself?
Sure. So we're just going to kind of go through the movie chronologically here and break down, what we saw. I know I went to the theater. I actually went a ways out of town because the closest one to me was sold out. The one I went to was almost sold out as well. I was the only one not in a LifeWise shirt. I was trying to be incognito, but I still stuck out like a sore thumb. I don't know how was you guys' experience, Doug, RJ?
Well, I can say for my screening here in St. Joseph, Missouri, we don't really have a LifeWise program that I know of less than like an hour radius from here. I was one of about 15 people in my theater, and actually, as I left, there was somebody in the hallway in a LifeWise T-shirt, like basically getting signatures for the local petition. So,
That somebody was Nancy, right?
yes, that was the
Yeah.
same person that tried to bring a LifeWise program to town, but I will bring that up later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had about in my showing about 15 people. They actually had three theaters in the theater that I went to. They had three showings going.
Wow.
But I don't know. I looked at they were through Fandango, so you can see which seats were reserved, and it looked like they weren't really that full.
Hmm.
any of them.
Right.
And then we had a LifeWise director from Toledo that was handing out literature, came in beforehand.
I'm surprised they ran 3 theaters. It seems
Mhm.
excessive.
I mean, in Ohio, like looking at it from a filmmaking perspective, it seems kind of logical that there would be more there because obviously LifeWise is headquartered in Ohio. So I mean, to me, that's not as surprising, but I can see that that is definitely an overage for sure. I think they probably were imagining that churches, usually when a faith-based film is released, churches as a group will buy blocks of tickets to like take people in buses to go see it, but maybe that just didn't happen this time.
Yeah. Well, I think the LifeWise did that. I mean, they did it with their programs, and I'm sure the local churches were involved too. So, yeah, the opening line of the movie, we're just gonna start right at the beginning. The opening line of the film starts out, "We've all seen the angry school board meetings and the online vitriol over what goes on during school hours." That's how it opens. Automatically got me fired up because, of course, they don't address the reason for the angry school board meetings is because of this stuff and these moms for liberty types that they're trying to, push these culture wars into our school, right? They just completely breeze over that. It really is kind of a sad attempt to showcase the importance of public schools. The narrator, he kind of tells us what the real agenda is behind this entire movement when he says our schools are future making factories. That line really bugged me too. Um, so we're facing a quote, a steep decline in the amount of healthy families. That is such an objective term. I don't even know how to handle that. What is a healthy family? Are my daughter and I not healthy because we're not, a single a mom, a dad, and 2.5 kids? Like, it's all subjective. So to frame it like it's some statistical fact, it, and this is within the first 30 seconds, right? So, um, the narrator continues to say that public schools are in an impossible situation. They have been backed into a corner, and states are in a David and Goliath situation. If David also had his hands tied behind his back, what issue leads him to this metaphor? Is it fighting as the underdog fighting in the corner? Is it the fact that they've been under prioritized, underfunded, or because they've been the center of political attacks? No, it's because they've found themselves, according to the commentary, not been allowed to answer the one big heavy question every student carries with them. Why does any of this even matter? Because clearly the only answer to that is Jesus, right?
So I think right off the bat, they're setting up like structurally they're setting up the ultimate straw man argument for which their entire argument rests upon. They're basically trying to create it from the very beginning, only show you this framework that this is the only proper way that the world can be upheld, and therefore this is being removed. So what they're trying to do essentially, they're trying to manufacture the disease so they can sell you the cure later on.
Yep, I think that's spot on.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's basically it's what we see a lot in the Christian nationalist movement overall. So it's casual fallacy, right? It's correlation, not causation. And they're saying that that's the cause is the taking the school prayer out. And but like Zach said, they're missing all of these social changes, economics, policy, inequality, technology, civil rights movements. I mean, there's just so many different things that would have an effect on that to pinpoint it to just taking the Bible out of school is wild. It's really a reach. It's wild work. Yeah.
Yeah, I got the sense, especially with the music that they used there at the beginning, the ominous dun 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 music, and they're like, the schools are broken, everything's blowing up. What will we do? And I'm thinking that's not the case. Not technically not the case. And they're trying to blame everything like anxiety and mental health issues and broken families on the fact that these kids aren't exposed to the Bible in school, but they don't ever mention how that works or how that solves anything, really.
The narrator goes on, he introduces himself as the director. It's Nate Lundquist. He is the media relations guy for LifeWise. He's been working on this movie for a while. I'm not sure what his other resume is. He's been friends with Joel Penton for a long time because he saw Joel come to one of his schools and speak and do an assembly and build a relationship up with him from there. So that's the guy who is narrating this and behind the movie itself. But Nate goes on to say the rise of science and secularism began to put pressure on the state to remove any sign of religion from the public school day. And this is where Kelly Shackelford comes in. Kelly Shackelford is the CEO of First Liberty. Um, and he starts out by saying, you can't come from a frame of reference that's neutral. You come from some frame of reference about what you believe about life, about death, about your purpose on earth. And there's really ultimately like two major differences. You either have something akin to atheism, and that statement never gets finished in the movie. He trails off with it. He never says what the other one is. Obviously, we know what the other one is, but again, it's that fallacy there. There's only these two frames of reference, and that you can't be neutral, right?
Don't they at one, and please correct me, guys, don't they at one point say something like the only, like the opposite of Christian is pagan? And
We're
that's
not there yet.
Yes, they did.
okay. I was
We'll
just
get
making
there.
sure that I didn't make that up in my head. We'll wait till later. Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just thought it was just an audacious comment to make that you can't have a frame of reference that's neutral.
right.
Right.
I'm sorry, but you can, this public schools can be neutral.
Yeah.
Or
And-
it's not neutral, at the very least fair. Like no one's
Mhm.
no one's saying that you're not allowed to practice Christianity in schools. You're just not allowed to force other children to practice it. And they kind of take a small step back here. That like also in the beginning, like behind all of this talking about like what's happening in the schools and you can't be objective. There's all of this montage of headlines and also these Jenga blocks falling down and collapsing, trying to create this kind of sound picture relationship in the film. And I found that borderline offensive because who are the ones pulling the damn bricks out? Like,
That's a
but
good point.
but then they bring up later they talk about the bricks being the like God being removed from the schools and no one's putting the bricks back. But sorry, there's a whole biblical allegory that I'll bring up later on about that. I don't want to divert us too much here. But the thing about the neutrality thing, I thought that was just so ridiculous as well because yeah, like it's not entirely false that you can't be completely neutral. Like we obviously weren't neutral going in to watch this movie, right?
Right.
But we can still be fair and objective as we analyze this. So I think when they were bringing that up in the film so early on, part of that is I think you're setting up what sometimes in filmmaking is called the rules of the game. So like when you're establishing a world in a narrative film, you have to set up the like what the world is like. And in this case, because they're showing such a contrived view of the world, they're having to dump all of this stuff right in the very beginning. And part of I think this whole like lack of neutrality concept that they're bringing up, I think it's more of a cop out. I think it's honestly more so you can say you don't have to give your opposition any thoughts. Like but like you can just kind of buy what we're saying.
See, I would push back on that, saying that it's a cop out. And I only say that because I had to deal with this question last week at Angola. But they really believe that what the schools are teaching goes against what they believe because they don't believe facts, whether we're talking about evolution or equality or, whatever they want to frame it as.
Litter
They say
boxes.
litter
Yeah.
boxes, right? That they really don't think that these schools are neutral and that this secularism idea is a religion in and of itself, the way they talk about it,
Yeah.
right? So I
Yeah.
don't know that it's a cop out. I think they honestly, a lot of them do believe this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm saying they do believe it, but
Yeah.
I'm saying it's being functionally used as a cop out.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of what they go on to say. I mean, that's what they're talking about, in this portion of the film, saying that atheism saw itself as the unbiased, neutral worldview. And so that only made sense to be taught in schools. Again, they're comparing that like schools are actively teaching there's no God, which isn't the case. They're not teaching atheism in schools, right? Doug, I'm sure you had some points about this as when I started to bring up Madeline, right?
Yeah, first of all, they got her name wrong, not
Yeah.
once, but twice. And I don't know if it was intentional or not, like they were dismissing the fact that she had a married name, because I think her real middle name is Marie, but her married name is Murray O'Hare.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that she's been dead since 1995 and they're dragging her body into this argument. And she wasn't the only one on that case. It wasn't even named for her because the Supreme Court didn't like her. And Ellery Shemp, the guy that got the Bible removed, or state mandated Bible removed, was the reason why he sued in the first place is during his Bible reading period in his class, he tried to read the Quran and he was disciplined. So they didn't talk about that either. So,
Right.
but yeah, that just it really irked me. But I knew that was probably going to happen at some point. Either they were going to pull out Richard Dawkins, which they did, or Sam Harris or somebody like that. But then they go back to to the 1960s, I think, is when, or early 70s when she was on Johnny Carson and pull that in. And the thing is, most of the stuff that she talked about sounded reasonable to me.
Sure.
Yeah. And the thing that I found interesting about that, because I wasn't super familiar with Madeline O'Hare before this, like I had heard of her. But as I was watching the film, I thought it was kind of odd how much they kept coming back to the Madeline O'Hare interview and talking about her. Because I thought, like, surely aren't there other bigger examples than this one interview, this one person, this one court case? And then later on in the film, when they talk about how like the filmmaker went to the same high school that she went to, or something about how the first LifeWise program was a school that she went to.
And maybe craziest of all, Madeline Marie O'Hare. Turns out she used to live about an hour and a half from me. And now every single district in her hometown has a LifeWise Academy.
Dude, that's when it clicked. Oh, that's the whole reason I brought it up, because they needed to have some kind of a touchdown dance to be able to do, and that was their best thing. So in a way, it was almost a sharpshooter fallacy where they had their bullseye. They shot at the bar and they had the target that they knew they could hit, and then they painted the bullseye around it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not to interrupt or anything, but Chris, would you disagree or mirror your feelings about the beginning of this, how it's starting, what your first impressions are?
Well, I did not get to see the film, but I was reading the transcript that Zach had provided, and
Yep.
It's a total misrepresentation of what happens in schools. I mean, it's like they've never set foot in a public school in the last 10, 15, 20 years, and they never anywhere touch on the socioeconomic pressures that families feel these days. I mean, that therein, if you want to talk about the struggles of the American family, let's talk about the socioeconomic structure of society that puts so many pressures on people. It's not a question of kids walking through the hallways wondering those great existential questions of why am I here? What is my purpose? It's like, what's for lunch? And am I going to have any homework? Those are
Right.
those are the more pressing questions. So, you know, they set up and their historical context is so frustrating because, my goodness, let's go back and talk about the Renaissance. Let's talk about the Enlightenment. Let's talk about other periods in Western culture where science and reason start to take over and push against the authority of established religions and the pushback from established religions. So it really, I mean, they neglect any mention of that, I think, after reading through the transcript.
Yep.
There is one line they do bring up later. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, just one other thing. I just got done covering like 5 different religious topics with my freshman in my freshman global studies class, freshman in high school. And yeah, I think I maintain a pretty good degree of neutrality when we're talking about the Crusades. So I think you can approach things from a neutral position as a teacher and not cast the good guy or bad guy, you know, label on whatever group you're talking about. So.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, that's journalism, right? And we know it's possible. We know it's been done. Maybe it's not being done now as much as it was, but we know that that is a possibility because, like RJ said, none of us are without bias, right? In some way, shape, or form. And so to be able to put that aside, we have lots of people that do that every day, and that's the core of what they do. That's their career.
Well,
Wait.
the older folks on here will remember a show called Dragnet with a character named Joe Friday, and he always just said, just the facts, just the facts. So,
Yeah.
Kind of connecting to that, in that Madeline O'Hare interview, they really linger on one of Carson's responses, where he's talking about basically saying what the evangelical point of view is about how there should be more Christianity in schools. And if you're watching him, if you didn't know much about Carson and you were watching that, it almost felt like they were trying to show Carson as being more supportive of that viewpoint. But if you really looked at Carson's like history and everything, he himself was a Christian, but did very much believe in separation of church and state, believed that church should be out of schools and all that. So that was, to me, kind of an example of how kind of selective editing can show that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Selective editing literally and then figuratively too. That's kind of what they get into next, is the whole idea of separation of church and state never being in the Constitution, saying that it's not in the government documentation anywhere, saying that they started using it, to discriminate against religion in all actuality, to be hostile against religion. Thoughts on that?
Well, historically, that's accurate. That nowhere in there in the Constitution does it say it. But the First
Not
Amendment.
the term itself, right? But this is that selective editing. The term isn't, but the idea certainly is, right?
Oh my goodness, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause in the First Amendment make it so. But I'd always direct people to Article 6 of the Constitution, and there's no religious test for holding office. And some states at that time, during the ratification period, some states at that time did have official state-sponsored churches, as well as some forms of religious tests. So the fact that in the framers of the Constitution knew better, and in Article 6, there's no religious test for holding office. And when people tell me that, that's based upon the Bible, and I always say, well, I've read the Constitution. Tell me where. Tell me where that there you see this, because it's not in there.
Yeah, and just to expand on what RJ said about, well, and what we're all talking about the selective editing. So selective editing, typically when you're talking about that, you're talking about like video, like a video,
Yeah.
and chunking that out and making it seem as though something different has happened than the reality of it, if you would have shown it in the correct order or whatever, right? So what they're doing is not necessarily that, but it's the same concept. It's selective framing. So they're working off a lot of omission. They're working off a lot of selective framing. They're working off the twisting of context of a lot of things. And we see that all the time with this particular argument about how the phrase is not in there. But we all know, I mean, and the thing it drives me nuts, and we could argue all day that my, simplification is ridiculous, but I don't care. I'm going to keep doing it. But I'm like, why did we leave? Why did we leave England? Tell me that. Talk to me about that. Like, I don't understand where the disconnect is, but that is something that they gloss over continuously, I'm sure, as you guys can see. And they did in the documentary as well.
And also a question to ask is, there was many states that had an established religion. Why don't they have any now?
Exactly that. And that's because we started getting too diverse for that to fly. Like, it's just, that's the simplicity of it, right?
There was a time not that long ago when JFK was considered unpopular because he was too Catholic. Like, that's the kind of country we have lived in before. Like
the Philadelphia Bible riots in the 1840s.
Yep.
There was one in Louisville, I think, in 1850 or something like that too. So
I always direct people to go back to something written by James Madison called Memorial and Remonstrance. That was published prior to the Constitution. And it really is one of the most foundational documents establishing a separation of church and state, or not the idea of no state support for religion that was going on in Virginia at the time about Baptists being persecuted. So Madison and Jefferson, because Jefferson will follow that up with the Virginia Statute on Religious Liberty not long after that. So that will be, those are a couple of very foundational documents prior even to the Constitution, to lay out that beginning of that separation.
So real quickly, Zach, go back. I was going to say, back to the movie itself. Where are we at this point?
Yeah, so we go from, the historical background and how separation of church and state was only meant to keep the government out of religion, not to keep religion out of the government. We kind of shift gears here to talk about biblical importance. They start off with this metaphor that we live in a, quote, cut flower culture, that we can't bloom because we're not attached to our roots of Christianity anymore, right? They go to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. I didn't even know there was a Museum of the Bible, but of course there is. And they talk to Dr. Jeff Kolla, He was the chief curatorial officer at the Museum of the Bible. He's not anymore, but that was his role. I'm not sure what he's doing now. Um, and he says, of course, the purpose of the museum is to highlight the Bible as one of the most important elements of our culture, our history, and indeed our nation. We talk about the impact of the Bible in the world and how it's affected things like literature, music, government, and science in all kinds of areas. There's a basic narrative and understanding of the world that comes from the Bible that
disciple
he
making
builds so many
church.
things on. What?
Sorry, my I had a tab open and it started playing sound. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought somebody had a question. Um, So he goes on to say that there's this idea that the beginning and the end, that basic idea comes from the Bible. Hinduism doesn't have that. Taoism doesn't have that. It's a fundamental Western idea that comes from the Bible. RJ and I were talking about that a little bit earlier. Molly, you're shaking
It's
your
so
head no.
offensive.
It kind of, but it also is from the Abrahamic religions. So I mean, I was looking for something to show me otherwise, but I couldn't really find anything. It does seem
Oh,
that
I
that
could.
idea. Well, you weren't researching it, so
No, I'm saying I have it right here.
okay, then go.
Are you talking about in terms of like you couldn't find anything that goes back further? Tell me exactly what you're talking about. Go ahead.
I mean, yeah, it just everything that I saw said that that idea does come from, the Abrahamic religions.
What idea?
The idea that there's a beginning and the end.
Oh, absolutely not. Hold on. So he's trying to contrast linear and like purposeful time with cyclical and endless time. And that's from Asia. So, but history won't let him. So there's something called, forgive me, please, but there's something called Zoroastrianism from ancient,
Zoroastrianism, yeah.
nailed it, from ancient Persia. And has a strikingly linear view of time, a good God, an evil force, and history moving and history moving toward a final renovation and judgment centuries before Christianity and alongside early Judaism. Also, Mesopotamia there was a time before the world stories, i.e., a beginning, again, pre-Bible. So Hinduism does have famous cycles, yugas, kalpas, which is probably what he's thinking of. But even there, you get repeated acts of creation and dissolution, or I'm sorry, and dissolution, lots of beginnings, not no beginning. So linear time is not a uniquely biblical export. At best, the biblical tradition is one of several ancient Near Eastern Persian traditions that moved history in a linear direction. So it's just straight up
Alrighty.
wrong.
Good.
All right.
To be fair, it was the last thing I was trying to look up to counter, and I was doing it about 3 minutes before we started. So
To also be fair, he did, and that was my part, so I had it. So we're good. Not true.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so, at the end of the day, what these guys are really good at is distracting from the reality. And the reality here is that the battle that we have to fight is not what they're teaching. If these parents want to have their kids released from school to teach that unicorns shit jelly beans, they can do that. The battle we have to fight, and I think that's going to be the successful battle at the end, is going to be the disruption in the classroom, in the school, the disruption that the teachers don't want this. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've been involved in Kentucky. Fortunately, we're still a May state for now, where we don't have to do it. But I've already talked in Indiana and met with teachers and some parents. They're frustrated with the fact that all they have to do, they have to accept it, but they can push back, and that's where the battle has to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not on what their beliefs are, because their beliefs, literally, they can believe that unicorns shit jelly beans. We can't fight that battle. They've already won.
I think you're right in the micro of LifeWise and of this battle,
Right.
but also when we're talking about this overall narrative of Christian nationalism and this revisionist history that we're talking about here, we do have to fight that back. Facts are facts, right? We're not talking about faith in that case.
Right.
That's what they're getting into throughout all of this part here. They're talking about there's an order to the world, there's a structure to the world, the foundation of modern science. You wouldn't have science without the Bible. They're saying all of this, right? RJ and I were talking. I'm sure Chris probably can jump in here. That's just, again, factually not true.
There's two battlefields. There's the battlefield of the message, which is a broader, and there's a battlefield on the direct impact at the school level.
Right.
The battlefield and direct impact at the school level has to be fought from a standpoint of the disruption in the school classroom, because that was how we were able to win in Oldham County in Kentucky with a 5-0 vote, when two of the people we know for sure were LifeWise people based on open records requests. They even voted against it because the amount of pressure was put on them because of the disruption in school, not because of what they were teaching, and not because what we thought of their faith or what this nonsense bullshit that they were that their beliefs were. So you're right. There's two battlefields. One is the broader, bigger picture, which is this is really dangerous to the country. The other battlefield is in the school, where we can't really talk about what they believe. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, yeah. So do you think we wouldn't have science without the Bible? Chris, I'm sure you got some thoughts on this, right?
I think we should ask people. Well, we can't because they're no longer with us, but we could talk to people like Copernicus and Galileo and Newton, and I could just run down the long laundry list of the great minds throughout history, and the pushback they got from organized religion at the time, because they're kind of cutting into the meal ticket, so to speak.
Darwin.
Right. That was kind of my observation too, was there was so much, and like not only that, about how like science had to kind of develop within the framework that the overarching society that was controlled by the church was allowing it to. So it's not that science emerged out of the church. It's that it emerged within it almost in a weird way, because of how much like society was governed by what the church said that the scientists were allowed to do. And then it wasn't until like you brought up, Chris, around the Renaissance, when you started getting the patronage system, paying for scientists and everyone to do all these crazy cool things. There was another part of that. So I kind of lost my train of thoughts. I'm just gonna concede on that last point, but yeah.
And just again, it's just patently false. Like,
Yeah.
so science in Europe was built on Greek natural philosophy. We know that. And on translation from the Islamic Golden Age. So these things already existed. You know, what they're saying is that, you know, we get credit. We get credit when they are not the original, like, originators of these ideas at all. It's just that these other people that did it, you know, what we understand our traditions are from, you know, what they made up, right? But their ideas, their original things that they're talking about, did not come from them. So for the argument to be that you have to have them is wild, you know, right? Like, that's when it all falls apart, is when you start to understand that these things, that first off, that they're just spewing facts that aren't correct. You know, astronomy, optics, algebra, none of which needed the Bible to exist. That's all coming from Islamic Golden Age. I'll tell you this right now. You know how a lot of medieval Christians translated stuff into Latin? That's because it was in Arabic. And they didn't ever want them to get the credit for the ideas. So like they actively erase history, you know, with actions and their words. So, you know, and Athenian democracy, Roman law, the Magna Carta, Iroquois Great Law of Peace, all of these things predate Christianity in some ways, have nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? So a lot of their facts are patently false. Just if you dug even a little bit, if you talk to any kind of historian, or I'm not a historian, but I'm reading this stuff to you because, you know what? I looked it up. Like, it's just not that complicated, right? So just please understand that this is one of propaganda's most useful tools, is the omission, is the selective framing, is the rewriting of the history, leaving out whole big swaths of history and context and everything else to make it fit. Like Doug said, I think it was you, Doug, I'm sorry, that you building it around the bullseye. That's exactly what is happening, right? Go ahead. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I wanted to add, though, too, that not only do they get history wrong completely when they do their little timeline where they say in the 1600s we had the Bible in school and it was religious. Well, that had ended by the 1830s, 1840s or so, and went into the common schools that we see today based on the Prussian model, because factory owners wanted workers to be able to read and write so they could give them instructions to work in the factory. They didn't teach religion even back then.
Yeah. Go capitalism.
Yeah. They're
First
like,
time you'll hear me say that. So we've got the time. The time comes from the Bible. Let's see.
Science.
Science comes from the Bible. The fundamental idea that human rights and human beings have value also comes from the Bible. He said that these are fundamental ideas that you don't have in Greek culture or Roman culture. You don't have them in Assyrian culture or Babylonian culture. This is where I did my research. There are so many examples of Greek and Roman philosophers talking about everybody having value and people having equal rights, and that there are natural laws and natural morals that are higher than human laws. Um, you can look at Cicero, you can look at the Stoics. Um, the person who is kind of credited for formulating the principles of freedom, equality, and dignity is Ulpian. Anybody else know? Am I saying that wrong? Probably. Uh, but he was kind of the one who put these ideas together, which are the core tenets of the modern human rights law. And his religion was a philosophical one rooted in the secular polytheistic Roman religion of the time. So, healthcare is another thing they specifically mentioned we wouldn't have without Christianity. Again, I dug into that just a little bit. By dug into it, I mean I asked ChatGPT. It took 3 seconds to tell me that the first hospital was in 4th century BCE by Hippocampus or Hippocrates, right? You know, they had it in Sri Lanka as well. They had one in the 4th century BCE. So it's just, again, factually.
What I liked, what really made me chuckle, and I had to stifle my laugh because I almost laughed out loud and I didn't want to
Couple
get
times, huh?
found out, was when they were talking about how you don't have equality of people unless you have the Bible.
Yep.
That evolution presupposes inequality.
Yep.
And I'm like, what?
Yep.
Have you been reading the newspaper? Have you been checking out these debates that people have where they're trying to cram religion into public schools because they feel that it's not equal. People aren't equal. And so I'm like thinking, well, if you do accept the theological thing about it, that men and women were made in God's image, then why do we have to fight for equality for women? So
Exactly.
it was just ridiculous. I seriously, I had to put my hand over my mouth so I'd stop laughing.
The whole sense of framing of evolution is based on inequality. They're acting like we're talking about equality in a physical sense, right? Like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about our dignity, right? When we're talking about our value, we're talking about our lives, our philosophies, and our consciousness. Evolution doesn't have anything to do with any of those, right? That's what we're talking about, people being created equal. We're not talking about physically. Such a ridiculous comparison to make.
Another thing from that section that jumped out at me was when it talked about how the Bible was like the basis for all the teaching of literacy.
Yeah.
And to me, what that kind of boiled down to more than anything was it would prove the fact that the only institution that had the power and privilege to pass around any singular text was the church. The reason the Gutenberg Bible was such a big deal in its time is because the first time we could just pull a lever and print books, and it just made sense at the time that the Bible was that thing, because and it reminded me a little bit of an argument I saw recently about how really white people were the ones that ended slavery. And you could have talked about how like Abraham Lincoln was a white guy that ended slavery. And then England, a whole island of white people ended its slavery 10 years before America did. And to me, what that just indicated was, yeah, because they were the ones who had the power and position to do that. It's like that. That's the kind of logic that I was seeing in that argument.
There was a really good quote here. The intellectual fall of America began on July 4th, 1776.
Intellectual fall of America began on July 4th, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
That would really hit me hard.
That was like one of the most unpatriotic things I've ever heard a Christian nationalist say. Like, wow, I was amazed they actually like could go that far to say and think that.
Yep. He says the biblical scholars were responsible for teaching the founding fathers the truth about human equality and the truth about human rights. He cites the Jefferson's first draft of the Constitution, says that we hold these, or the Declaration says that we hold these truths to be self-evident. His actual first draft was sacred instead of self-evident.
It said, Zach, it's the Declaration, not the Constitution.
Yeah.
Jefferson said sacred and undeniable, and then Franklin was on the Committee of Five, and Franklin perhaps talked him off the ledge and said it sounds a little bit too much like it's maybe from the pulpit. So he backed up on that.
And Jefferson ended up with his own Bible because he didn't believe, right?
Yeah, I mean, Jefferson was a deist. Franklin was a deist.
Right.
Washington was probably a deist. Madison was huge on religious liberty. So even John Adams, who was religious, was on record as saying that morality and religion is important, but we're not going to dictate what it should be.
Yeah. And Thomas Paine. Yeah. Right.
Well, yeah.
Can I add a few words about that? Because this is one of the topics I talked about in one of my recent podcast episodes. I checked out the book. I've had the book, and I finally read some bits of it. Andrew Seidel's book, The Founding Myth. And basically what you get when you read about the founders is they were gentlemen, they were wealthy, they owned property, they were nominally religious. They believed, like Marx did, that religion is used in place of morality to control the peasants. That's how they viewed religion in general. So the fact that Jefferson allowed that change from sacred and undeniable to self-evident makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That he would go ahead and do that because he really tried to protect his words. And then the other thing about it too is the Declaration of Independence is anti-God. It's against the Bible because the Bible says that if God ordains a government, you have to obey it. And who were they leaving? The divine right of King George III. And that whole section was just ridiculous to me.
And I think back to kind of the first point you brought up, that's so vital that they did kind of have some of their own religious beliefs, and he was willing to change this, that phrase. It really shows that they were able to have the fortitude to put aside their personal beliefs because they understood how important it was for all of the diversity of beliefs. And that is the part that's missing in the equation, right?
And they were very close to the reality of having a religion forced on them in England.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So that put them in a whole different place than we are. Yeah.
I also just find it weird that they were building such a passionate argument off of what an unreleased revision of it, like not the final, like agreed upon text. Like they had to go to the like you can see the first iteration of the Star Wars scripts, and it is a very different movie. Trust me. But like no one's like referring to that. So why are they referring to an unfinished, unpublished version of the Constitution, or sorry, the Declaration of Independence to form their argument? That makes no sense.
And they don't explain why it was changed.
Right.
Well, and if they're relying on Jefferson, they're really barking up the wrong tree.
Right.
He was into Islam. Like he actually hired an Arabic translator to help teach him the Quran. Like.
Yeah. So that's probably not where you want to hang your hat on his original draft.
No.
Well, the next person they bring into the conversation is Jordan Peterson. So
They're
not picking the best and the brightest. Yeah, Peterson has that little clip there where he says that it's not that the Bible's true, it's more than true. It's factually true. It can't be any other way. And his reasoning for this is because all other literature is built upon it. It's so hard to follow. It's just such nonsense.
There's some there's a few ancient Greek playwrights that would like a word with him.
I'm sure from every culture, right? Like that's the thing. There's so many cultures that came and went and wrote stuff down. It's just an insane thing to think.
like in the movie world, we were so desperate for original stories that by like the 1950s, we were starting to have to steal stories from Japanese filmmakers just to make original movies and sell tickets. Like there is a whole wealth of what, like a few years ago when what was it, Parasite, the South Korean movie, won the Oscar for Best Picture, and the director gave the speech, and he said if you can rise over a 2-inch barrier at the bottom of your screen, a whole new world is open to you. And I think that's just so indicative of how many different kinds of storytelling can exist outside of good guy versus bad guy. Yeah, it's all, that was just such a ridiculous argument to me that all literature is based on the Bible. Completely axiomatically false.
Yeah. And that was just part of the analogy. It was all literature was, and then also everything else beyond that, right? So that was only even the first part of it. So then we have Dr. Barna come in, Director of Research and co-founder of the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. It's when he starts to come in talking about the biblical worldview. This part here really irked me. I think Molly has some stats on this, hopefully. But he goes on to talk about how people who have a biblical worldview discover they have greater, deeper, broader sense of joy in life. Their marriages last longer, more capable of retaining a long-term relationship with their children. And of course, they have a greater sense of a real relationship with God, deeper sense of a meaning in life. The data just goes on and on about what an incredible difference it makes to have a biblical worldview.
Yeah, absolutely. And as with everything else, it's a misrepresentation. It's causation over correlation, or correlation over causation. Like they're not understanding that these things can have an effect, but that's not the effect. So like religious involvement can help parent-child relationships when it comes with warmth and flexibility. But high control Christian nationalist parenting often backfires, especially when kids think differently, leave the faith, or come out. And then the research shows it's the quality of attachment, not the ideology, that keeps kids close. And that's pretty much as solid as it could be. Like that is across the board the idea with all of the studies that have been done as far as religious parenting, and that they're somehow better or happier or more effective as parents than the rest of us. So there's that part. And then let's see, there was one other thing too. Let me see here. I've got the one about forgive me guys, there's a lot of notes here. And of course they just keep lying, right? So you have to break down every single lie and provide a billion different examples of such. But we've already gone over how like the very specifics aren't true. But Zach, the other thing that I wanted to make sure we didn't miss was that, so when they're talking about Christians are the ones who brought empathy, charity, hospitals, caring for the poor, and other cultures didn't have that, they're not just being historically wrong. They're not just using propaganda to drive it towards biblical, and their idea of biblical or the gospel. They're doing a hierarchy of civilization move. And because in their heads, real Christianity equals their version of Western, mostly white, Protestant Christianity, it slides very fast into a racialized story, even without them saying race out loud. So what we have to understand is that they're moral monopolizing. They're claiming a monopoly on basic human capacities, things like caring for the weak, like we've talked about, and it erases non-Christian, non-white care systems, which we have plenty of examples of. I'm not going to go through them. There's a million. And it's a short walk from only Christians care to non-Christians or savage. And that goes back to when we're talking about colonialism, and it's the old civilizing mission script. So we brought schools, hospitals, and morals. Therefore, colonized people were backward, quote unquote. Therefore, we are justified in controlling them. And like that is where they are leaning. That is absolutely where their arguments are coming from. So it's important to understand that not only are they offensive in a way of other cultures having these things, and their historical facts are not correct, but in the sense that they're absolutely like tinged and soaked in racism, and blind about all the Christian harm that we know, right? So they don't talk about any of that stuff. They're not talking about, if Christianity is the only source of empathy, right? Then what do we do about churches defending slavery, missions running residential schools, apartheid's Dutch Reformed theology, Jim Crow Bible verses, child abuse in religious settings? So like, again, it's what RJ said. It's selective framing. It's selective editing. It's taking credit where credit isn't due, and then reframing it and saying like, but we've never done anything wrong, and then leaving out the actual historical facts of the matter. So, you know, it's all sorts of different things on different levels, right, guys? Like the propaganda of it all is Christian nationalists in flavor. It is absolutely talking about, you know, that our roots are Christian values, that our country is based on that we need to go back to that all of our problems stem from not having that. So it's from top to bottom misled and offensive and inaccurate, right?
Yeah. But you know, there's the division of it. It comes from this worldview talking point here, right? Because if you don't have this worldview, you are broken and you are missing something. Doug, you mentioned the Barna Group is not, you know, not neutral. I'm sure, otherwise they wouldn't be in this film. Can you expand on that and also talk about a humanist worldview?
Yeah, well, George Barna, he does a lot of polling for faith-based religious groups. I even think he advised George Bush or something at one point, and so he would not be in this movie. If they wanted something that was neutral, they would talk to like PRI or one of those other pollsters, but that wasn't the point. For a humanist worldview is that, you know, we believe that this life that we're in right now is all that we have, and we have to make it the best that we can. And so we need to treat everybody with basic dignity and worth and equally, and not have any, you know, we know that we have biases, but we need to identify those biases and work through them. And it's pretty much what the LifeWise people talk about, but we don't say that you have to have the supernatural or a Bible for it.
Yep. And I think they would argue that that worldview would have been taken from them, right? Like you
You're
wouldn't have
right.
that worldview if it weren't for the Bible, which, you know, like we talked about earlier, there are so many philosophers that talked about these kind of ideas well before the Bible.
Not only
Um,
that, but one of the things they mentioned is that like Christianity was this only worldview, and of course I'm saying this in air quotes. Christianity is the only worldview that brings any kind of sense of value to self.
Yep.
And I personally have kind of felt the opposite because growing up in a kind of evangelical light church, it was very much the sense of you should not think about yourself so much because your dichotomy or your sort of hierarchy should be God first, other second, self last. And if you look at some of the other religions that sometimes I was told were kind of a bad influence, I guess you could say, like some of the aspects of like Buddhism about trying to attain a greater sense of self was saying to be drawing you away from God. So to me, like the argument that Christianity was the only religion that brought a sense of self was not only factually wrong, but it seemed kind of opposite to my upbringing in the church.
that quote is the next one I had here. They're talking about Americans develop their worldview not based on what they think, but what they feel. And a biblical worldview is not about what you feel, which is exactly what you just said. They say it often conflicts with your natural feelings because it's not designed to make you feel good within the boundaries of the culture. It's designed to make you feel good within the boundaries of God, right? And that's exactly what you just said. So they you know, they even countered themselves.
Yeah, they spent quite a long time building up this argument for the Bible. And I am an atheist, so that kind of went whoop. But you could pick out, you know, like what we've been talking about, that the different connections and the things that they misstate and they leave out and all that stuff. And it kind of got me because in the field, they don't talk that much about the Bible. So they were definitely pointing this at an audience that they knew they needed to focus on. And so they talked about the Bible. If they were given this film, if they were showing this film at a school board meeting, you would not have heard anything about the Bible.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was front loaded with all of this. They haven't even addressed LifeWise yet, and we're almost to the end already. Um, the next person that comes in, John Stone Street, president for the Colston Center for Christian Worldview. He goes on talking about how disconnecting the Bible from the school is like loosening the earth from its sun. The sun goes away, we can't rotate, we have no warmth, we have nothing to give us life, right? All of this type of nonsense. What's going to lighten our way? Daniel John Davidson comes on. This is what Molly had mentioned earlier. They played a clip from the Counterpoint show where this Daniel Davidson says there's only one alternative to Christianity, and it's not secularism, it's paganism.
There's really only one alternative to Christianity, and it's not secularism. It's paganism.
I don't even have an argument for that. I mean, just what a load of nonsense, right?
It'd be more fun.
Yeah, yeah. I thought it was interesting too when they were listing the worldviews. They focused on Marxism, and I noticed they also had Mormonism listed separately on the little piece of paper that had them all listed. Because again, Mormons aren't Christian, right? Even though they believe that Christ is their savior, which I thought was the definition of a Christian. But what do I know? I'm a Mormon, so I don't count, right? Whatever. Uh, so
There's always been kind of a weird divide with Mormonism and evangelicals. That like it's such kind of a weird thing to have witnessed even from the inside.
I mean, I was on the inside, and I had no idea the divide was there. We thought we were Christians, right? So I don't know.
Well, like here in Missouri, in the 1800s, there actually, and this is factual, there actually was kind of a genocide against Mormons that happened in the 1800s. There was like, or 5,000 Mormon men were killed or something like that. So yeah, there's always has been a weird butting of heads that happened between Mormonism and evangelicals.
So now we're kind of getting into LifeWise itself here. We're kind of entering into that. There's just a couple quotes here. They cut to Vince Coleman, a former vice principal, who says it would be so nice if students didn't come to us as broken individuals. What a wild thing to say about kids. I don't know that many of our teachers are trained to be social workers. You really can't move into instruction without addressing what's actually going on. You know what I would say? I would say they're more trained to be social workers than the LifeWise people are.
Yeah, because what like I think Chris touched on this earlier that they didn't mention much about socioeconomic things. This is the one part where they do kind of bring it up. And their argument is, okay, we're going to take kids out of the place that they're in for like 7 hours a day. In that 1 hour time that we have them, we'll be able to see the things that's wrong in their lives that the schools can't. And so the like how? And like it's not even a full hour because it's the bus time there and back. So
Right.
it's that just broke my brain that sounded like a good or concise argument to them.
Well,
Susan, you got a question?
it always misses the elephant in the room too, because what's happening for that time they spend at their house of worship on Sunday?
Right. And if
Is
they're going to a LifeWise Academy program, they obviously are in a church. So yeah, why isn't their church body fighting that?
Are the churches not doing a good job? Because this is why these kids are broken, and they send them to school broken because the churches aren't doing what they are professing to do. So I mean, it becomes almost a non sequitur in terms of an argument, because somehow an extra hour a week is going to make the difference.
Well, I think that comes down to the core of they're not targeting the kids that are already in church. They're targeting the ones who aren't, right? Because this is about conversion. So we're to the point now where they actually start getting into LifeWise, their release time, now that we're over halfway through the movie. They summarize Zorak a little bit. I'm not going to do that here tonight. I'm sure hopefully everybody here is already familiar with Zorak and how LifeWise frames it versus all the stuff that they leave out of that framing. We go to Tim Stoller, who is on the board, has been on the board since the very beginning of this, from Van Wert, Ohio. He talks about a kickoff meeting they had in their town of Van Wert for RTRI in 2012, a little before that. The local attorney kicked that meeting off and explained this is all legal, because my first reaction was this can't be legal, they all say. Nate goes on to say that many different religious communities and organizations have utilized release time laws, which again, he's contradicting their own claims when they say it's this little known loophole, right? We hear Joel say that all the time. in every interview. It's this little known, barely used loophole, but in their movie, they're saying different religious communities and organizations have utilized these laws. So which one is it? You know?
Yeah.
But
I'll
Tim
tell you
started.
the truth of the matter really quickly is that these laws, this availability has been around for a long time, but it is not used widely. And here's why. RTRI only works when it is being done in an area where that particular religion is already the powerhouse. Okay. So you're never going to have an RTRI of Judaism in a Catholic parish dominated school district. That's not how it works. So what we're seeing, and there's also the inequity of it all, right? That the Hindu, any other diverse religion or minority religion isn't going to have the structure and the funding to offer their own RTRI program. So out goes the equality with that part, right? So these things, again, they will tell you a true fact, but then not give you the context. And as we all know, that changes everything. So when they're saying like, oh, they've been used for years, yeah, absolutely true. Jews have been taking children out for RTRI for 50 years or more in boroughs in New York, where the majority of the children attending the school district are either Jewish or Jewish adjacent or Jewish friendly. And they have done everything they can not to interrupt the school day when it comes to stuff like that. Same goes for the Mormons. Same goes for the Catholics. This is different. And Zach touched on it earlier because it is based around recruitment. They are targeting not the powerhouse religion in that area, but the children who don't have a religion or the children of a different religion, and they are converting them to their flavor of the Christianity, right? So that's where this all comes together and how it's different. And again, how you have to understand that they will say some things that are facts. It's important that you acknowledge those facts, but then give context to them, because it makes all the difference in the world. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. Do you see all this hullabaloo about LifeWise? Because that's exactly what I'm saying. They are in effect, as an example, taking a evangelical Christianity program, and instead of putting it into a dominantly evangelical area, which they do and they have and they will, they're trying to shove it into places that are much more diverse than that have an issue with that have kids of all different faiths. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Ryan, you got a question?
Just a comment. You mentioned Zorich, and something that I encourage everybody to do if they haven't is read the 3 dissenting opinions in Zorich. They are really powerful statements. So
they knew,
if you're not familiar with them,
those are dissents. They knew that if you read them, it's like people here wrote it. Like it's like they knew what was going to happen when this went through, and we are looking at what happened because this went through. And this is another thing that I think people need to know, that RTRI laws, they should have never been passed to begin with. We're not talking about good law. We're talking about bad law that was passed for a bad reason. And it has been not very much used until now. And now they're using that as an excuse and trying to, McDonald's this thing, right? And have the whole country go after it. So, it is something that's, again, multi-layered. It's important that you understand all the different layers so that you can put the entire narrative, the entire story together for anyone who is in opposition that you need to join you to help fight in your area.
So yeah, Tim kicks his program off. They brag about having 95% enrollment rate there in Van Wert at the program called Cross Over the Hill. We actually have a student who was in school at that time who wrote us a testimonial about his experience. It's actually one of my good close friends' sons. Molly?
Yeah, I'm not going to read it through. It's pretty long.
Hit the highlights.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they act like this is such a huge thing and everybody wants it and everybody loves it, right?
So, manufactured choice, right? So this is a quote from his testimony. Every grade there would be a small handful of children who didn't go. We would sit quietly and read. So, and then I put some notes down here. The film is selling time release as a choice. But the child sitting alone while classmates are whisked away for fun and candy doesn't experience freedom. They experience isolation, right? So in practice, this is coerced participation through social dynamics. LifeWise calls it an opportunity. Students call it loneliness. This is another quote from the same same child. They came back with candy from Easter egg hunts and talked about fun activities. One kid said he wasn't even Christian, but liked going because it was more fun.
And that's
That-
the point.
yeah, so that line perfectly exposes LifeWise tactic. They don't recruit through belief, they recruit
This
through
wasn't
fun.
LifeWise they were talking about. Just to reiterate, this was pre-LifeWise.
Yeah, this is the prototype.
Yeah.
This is what LifeWise is based off of, is
Yeah.
Cross Over the Hill. This is a program that they had going since whatever, 2012 or whatever Zach said, that was a success by the time Joel got there in 2018, and they decided they need to corporate franchise this thing.
Yep.
Go ahead, John. Yeah.
So Molly, can you make that letter? Because telling stories is strong.
Yeah.
Stating facts is one thing, but when you're able to repeat stories, it has an impact. Can you?
All of these testimonies are on our website under personal experiences.
Okay, I'll have to go back there and look. Okay, I'll find that because that's
Absolutely.
yeah, because those actually are really critical. Yeah.
Oh, big time. That's what we always encourage people to send us their personal experiences, because that's what people need to see. That's what these larger national organizations are missing, is that sometimes their laws and their legalese and their, history go over people's head. But when you tell someone a story about how it's affected them, how their child has come home crying, worried about burning in hell, that they can't sleep, that they don't want to be Jewish anymore, that's when you really hit the nail on the head, because that is the pain that's been causing, right? That's the harm that we're seeing. So another quote is, multiple papers were handed out by our teachers about Cross Over the Hill. So the teachers are handing out the papers. That's another thing that we always talk about, is that's the appearance of authority picking a religion, right? That is your teacher being like, all these other kids are going, why aren't you two going? And that's how it feels, right? Children don't see neutrality, they see endorsement. So, and then he said, this is another quote, "It made me feel quite lonely." This one line devastates LifeWise's entire premise. Their film shows smiling children and upbeat music, but never the quiet classroom, the handful of kids left behind feeling unwanted. That's what coercion looks like in real life, right? The fear of being left out. That is what our children are dealing with, and they deal with that all the time anyway. So this is just adding something else that is so complex and divisive, and something that they just aren't ready to even comprehend, in my opinion. So this is where they're coming from. This is Van Wert, it wasn't just a test site. Like, it was the blueprint. Like I said, it was the pilot run.
I mean, it turned into that. It didn't set out to be that way, but that's what it turned into. This is where Joel enters the picture. During this program, Joel comes in. He was asked to give a speech during their dedication ceremony. This is all talked about during the movie. He talks about how football gave him a platform for a career in public speaking, how he spent 12 years traveling the country. And then 2018, Joel was asked to go speak at the building dedication ceremony. So this program in Van Wert had been running for about 6 years. When Joel says he found out about it, again, his sister worked for the program at least 3 years before this. So either he didn't talk to his sister or he's lying yet again, one of the two. And then he goes on this 6-7 minute rant about typical land versus Bible education land. I don't know if any of the two of you that watched the movie watched the clip that I put about this little bit. It was entirely too close to what the actual movie was. I laughed so hard when he's playing this thing about the Bible land and typical land and building the highway, and like what I made just off the top of my head using AI and what they did in the film was entirely too close. I don't know if either of you guys saw it.
Release time, while it's easy to articulate, you take kids out of school, teach them the Bible, bring them back, it is anything but easy to actually implement, because you basically have to start a private school. You gotta find a facility and maybe transportation and insurance and technology and fundraising, the list goes on. And that in fact became my answer to the question, why hasn't this spread in 70 years? Because of the many barriers to entry. I kind of think about it like a big map. So picture a big Lord of the Rings style old map, and on one corner of the map you have what we'll call typical land. This is where most communities are, where the Bible has been removed from the public school day, and students don't have access to Bible education during school hours. However, on the other side of the map, the other corner, In 1952, a new land was discovered, a tropical paradise that we will call Bible Education Land, where students can receive Bible education during school hours. The only problem is that these lands are separated by a vast wilderness, and those are the barriers to entry. You know, you have the policies, everything regarding legality and HR and curriculum and safety and all the things you need to figure out. You have school relations, you know, how are you going to connect with the school and get school approval and coordinate the details and the schedule. You have all the logistics, you know, how are you going to coordinate the volunteers and manage the schedule and organize all those details. You have fundraising. Where are you going to find the dollars to hire the teachers, to get the materials and the facility, maybe even a bus to get the kids there? And then, of course, you have marketing. You know, you need to enroll students, and so how are you going to engage with families, many of whom are not connected to local churches? So theoretically, at any point over the last 70 years, a community could metaphorically strap on a backpack and make their way through the wilderness to Bible Education Land. However, you know, there's bears in that forest, and you could get eaten, and if you make it to Bible Education Land, you'd have to pitch a tent and forage for food. But if at any point the leader, the explorer, you know, can't do it, then the whole thing kind of falls apart. And we started thinking, but what if somebody could tame the wilderness? You know, what if we could cut a path through the wilderness? In fact, build an 8-lane super highway, and on the other side in Bible Education Land, build out the infrastructure, the water tower, the electric company, the roads, and so that sure, communities would still need to buy a car, but there'd be a smooth path for them to get there. And on the other side, in Bible Education Land, yeah, they need to buy a home, but the infrastructure's there. Is it possible, if we could do this, that it would trigger a mass migration from typical land to Bible Education Land? And it was that idea that really gave way to the concept of LifeWise Academy. And it really crystallized in my mind on the drive home from that building dedication ceremony where I spoke in Van Wert. I had a 2-hour drive home, and driving back, I mean, my mind was just racing, and it was like this idea, this vision just popped into my head, fully formed. Imagine, you know, in Van Wert, 95% of the students are receiving Bible education during school hours. What if other communities saw the same thing? In Van Wert, the school was seeing the results and the community was engaged. What if you saw the same thing play out coast to coast? And what if you could put it all together into a usable, repeatable, plug-and-play program that any community could implement without having to reinvent the wheel? I mean, the idea was so big, it was uncertain, but it was so clear. And that was over 5 years ago, and now I'm the founder and CEO of LifeWise Academy, and it's happening.
It was scary. It was scary close, right? It was like Zach's worst imagination he could think up. Let's make this graphic. And then basically they recreated it. And we were both like, you know, we really thought that we had taken that to the extreme on purpose to make a point. And turns out, no. And that's sort of been like the theme with LifeWise, right? At first, we just thought that it was sort of an isolated problem and that, you know, they were absolutely infringing on, you know, our children's rights and things like that. But as we've gone on, and like, oh, you guys all know, this is such a bigger thing. It's about destroying public education. It's about Christian nationalism. It's about Project 2025. It's about these big organizations backing these things and changing laws and, you know, indoctrinating our children and controlling the whole country by their own set of rules. So
it's about grooming voters.
It's exactly about that. It is exactly about grooming the next generation of voters, right? Right.
Yeah, and Joel talks about in that section too about, well, it has to be LifeWise because we can get through all these obstacles. You have to create a private school. When he said private school, a literal private school. I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
All right,
exactly.
so
And that's sort of what the end goal is, right? Like that's my big concern.
And
go ahead,
so,
Brent.
so it jumped out at me about that section too, is it talked about how like, well, what if there was somebody that could find all the ways to hack their way through the forest, and talk about how like LifeWise solves all these problems. So what I was kind of confused by that was, what is it that LifeWise actually gives a starting chapter? Like, what is it that they do to help them navigate like getting the bus there, getting a facility? Like, what is it they do to help facilitate that?
Templates. I
Templates,
mean, they
a
have
whole
templates
plan.
and
Okay.
forms, and yeah, I mean,
I
it's
mean,
simplistic.
everything that you can think of. It is so okay. Imagine that you bought a McDonald's, right? And
Mhm.
you're like, what do I do? And they give you like a binder of everything you do. That is the same process that LifeWise is functioning under. So they are giving you templates for everything you can imagine. They are giving you step-by-step plans. They are giving you don't do this until you've done that. I mean, they are making it so easy a moron could do it, and they are.
Like, you're buying a
So,
curriculum,
like
basically.
it's just
Yeah.
sort of, not to be mean, but like in some cases that is true, and they've made it that way on purpose. That's why we're seeing this explosive growth. It's not necessarily because they're so great at what they do or the kids are enjoying it so much. It's the marketing. It's how easy it is. It's the grift and all of the ways that they've made that grift accessible.
Yeah. When they talk about like you basically start your own private school, it's like, yeah, why don't you just send your kid to a damn private school in the first place if you want, if that's what you wanted.
Thank you. That's what we've been saying, right?
Mm.
Zach, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, we're almost at 8:30. I know I still have scheduled this too. I don't want to keep anybody too long, so I just want to kind of get through the last little bit here of this. They talk about, again, they mentioned the separation of church and state. They say it's so widely misunderstood, it's almost comical. And then they cut to the clip of this children playing with Legos. They say this is so easy to understand. We'll have these kids explain it to you, which just really irked me. But I felt like they were talking to me personally, if I'm being honest. So, but this clip is just showing these kids playing with Legos, driving a school bus, and saying, "Look, we picked the kids up from the school. We drove them to the LifeWise classroom. We've separated them from the state. Isn't that simple? Don't you understand?" Like,
That was
everybody
them
else,
trying to do a touchdown dance. That was them like making fun of the people who don't understand, essentially.
that's why it got me so bad. Yeah.
So do you guys, the guys that for those of you that saw the film, because my thought was that this might actually bite them in the ass. Uh, was your takeaway any chance at all that they may have exposed themselves to people that are more middle of the road and not extremists, that will see this as a threat to their religion and to their beliefs, that they will that will backfire on them?
No.
Not without us.
Yeah,
Like,
okay.
and not to be, and yeah, not to toot our own horn or anything of that nature, but not without a national sort of
Sure.
watchdog that is saying this
Right.
was quoted in this movie, because again, it's not available anywhere, right?
Not going to
So other
reach an
people,
audience, except
yeah,
it's only going to be seen by those who want to see it, I think.
exactly. That's the other thing I was getting ready to say is like they're not reaching anyone who would be like, what did they just say? Except for us, right? So it's our job to tell everyone else what is in the documentary. Like we're educating you guys so you can go out and educate everyone else in your areas, right? That's the point. And so now sort of what it was built on, and you can fight back in that way, and so sort of talk about how it's a propaganda film.
Kelly Shackelford comes back in here and he starts bragging about how they've won, as in First Liberty, have won 4 Supreme Court cases in 13 months on, quote, religious freedom. That doesn't happen. That has never happened. There's 8,000 requests a year for the Supreme Court to take your case. They took 59 last year, 67 the year before. The odds of us getting one case taken is not good. They didn't just take one case, we won 4 cases in 13 months. That's not possible. I mean, that's not possible. It's just only God can do that.
And not only that, but Kelly Shackelford has been spending a lot of time lately in the Supreme Court, and several recent rulings have opened the door to religious freedom wider than it has ever been in the history of the United States.
We just won 4 Supreme Court cases in 13 months on religious freedom. That doesn't happen. That has never happened. There's 8,000 requests a year for the Supreme Court to take your case. They took 59 last year. They took 67 the year before. The odds of us getting one case taken is not good. They didn't just take 4 cases, we won 4 cases in 13 months. That's not possible. I mean, it's just, only God could do that. This has never happened in the history of our country.
That isn't God. That is a broken judicial system with a bunch of dark money and political think tanks behind it. That's what that is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They wrap their movie up with a few testimonials, right? The first one that they talk about is a student named Connor, and I'll be honest, this whole thing just kind of disgusted me that they were using the student's death as a promotional and marketing material. They talk about how this kid was kind of rambunctious and kind of loud and kind of annoying, but then his personality started to change halfway through the semester of LifeWise. And then there was a car accident where unfortunately he passed away. His dad, his grandfather passed away with him in this car accident. And they start going through his stuff, and he has, his binders filled with phrases like stay faithfully and things like that. And he just was so grateful that he had been saved just a few weeks or months earlier at camp. He'd been baptized and saved. And, they present this story of, this tragedy as being some great testimonial of their program. And all I'm thinking while I'm watching this is, and you believe that if he wouldn't have got saved at that camp, that this young child would be burning in hell right now. That's the part you're leaving out, and that pissed me off, right?
Yeah. And let's not forget that they also use that tragedy, and I've seen them do it many other times, where they use it as a recruitment tactic. So they will bring together the community and have a vigil, and then use that time to have kids sign up for LifeWise.
Did you guys have any thoughts on that, Chris, Doug, RJ? I mean, you guys saw it.
Yeah, I had the same feeling. I was like, when they were talking about that, I was like, oh, they're going to talk about this kid who's causing trouble, and then he read the Bible and he became perfect, and then they're like, and then he died. I'm like, oh my gosh,
hard left.
Right. Now, honestly, I kind of saw the fatality coming. I mean, having grown up in in evangelical circles and everything, Connor's story was not the first one I've seen. So about like the wayward youth that was saved and then is this tragic loss. And I think to me, the ethics of that boil down to one thing: is how do his parents feel about that? So without knowing that, I can't really weigh in on too much and if I personally found that to be ethical or not. Because for all we know, what if Connor wanted to be remembered that way?
Well, she was in the film.
Right.
The mom was in the film.
I remember that now. You're right. Okay. So yeah, there with consent there, that to me kind of does play a big factor there. And to kind of take it back just kind of a moment when we were talking about how if people were going to be alarmed by this movie and people who are more neutral in faith being alarmed by this, my answer would be no. Because so much of this film, so much about LifeWise, is not a red flag to anyone on the surface. It's only when you actually look at it for a while, like we have, that it starts to, you see the red flags. Because I walked in expecting even more propaganda than this. I was expecting to see like drag queens are teaching your children how to read. That's what I was expecting, and this wasn't quite that.
No, it was just revisionist history, and
right.
This is the only solution. And
there was nothing alarming about it.
Right.
And so I think that's why you see such apathy from groups like your secular activist groups and everything, is that they don't see the red flags because they haven't looked at it the way we have, but we keep trying to show them that, and they're not paying attention.
So then the next story that they talk about is a lady who talks about her grandma who started a release time program over 60 years ago. The church was packed at her funeral, and the pastor was talking about her, and he asked the church to stand up and ask them, how many of you came to faith because of a Bible education program? And 2/3 of the church stood up. That seemed wild to me. Again, it's a really good way to frame something that isn't a statistic as a statistic, right?
And it was a doctor too that was telling the story. I didn't know she was a doctor till she said she was a doctor.
Okay. Yeah, I missed that.
The granddaughter, I think it was the granddaughter was telling the story.
Yeah, it was the granddaughter. I missed that entirely, that she was a doctor. So yeah, just gives her more credibility, right?
Speaking of qualifications, in that section when they were doing the whole talking, like the talking heads talking about like Connor's story and everything, you notice the only person of color that they interviewed the entire time was the school bus driver. And I realized, like, yeah, because there's like so many things about like Christian nationalism being white Christian nationalism is so under the surface and it's not obvious. They, with I think maybe one exception, every single talking head that was like the experts in their field were all white. And
they had they had one other guy.
Middle Eastern gentleman with the accent. Whose
Well,
name
and on their own advertisement for the movie, they call him an Indian philosopher and author. That's their words. But yeah, and
He's
again, that was the
he's a
one who said the
Christian.
intellectual fall of America began on July 4th, 1776.
Yeah,
So,
he's a Christian. He started a Christian organization in India and had his house burned down, and you know, he experienced real Christian
Yeah.
persecution.
So, and just real quick, this is really all I have left to contribute is so in the film, and RJ, I want you to
well, let me finish my last one. There's one more, because there's one more story here. There's one more story that they use as a testimonial. There's this child who comes home after her cousins were talking about LifeWise, and she accounts how they told her who God was. And I went through confusion, like, who is that? I want to know who he is. And I remember that I came home and I slammed my hand on the island, saying to my parents, "Why don't you take me to church? Why don't you tell me about God?" The key here is that the parents were already Christians. They were non-practicing, they admit, but they started out that way and had some sort of faith and belief in God. Imagine how this plays out when it's not a Christian child coming home slamming their hand on the counter. That's what they're completely missing here. But they go on to brag. It's just a great story about how these unactive Christians later went and got baptized and now attend their church and read their Bible every day, and how this child brought it home to the whole family and it just spread to all of them. So they're not using a conversion, right? But they're getting people more actively involved in the church. But we know what they really want is to reach other people that way and convert them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've also talked in line with that about how we see it happen over and over again. They like to say it's local. They like to say it's within your community that's bringing it. But so often we see where it's like the pastor's wife who runs, like, of the big box church in that area, the pastor's wife or his brother or whoever runs the LifeWise program. And then they funnel the LifeWise kids and their families into that specific church or that specific grouping of churches. So it's really a recruitment measure as well, not only for the kids, but for the families. Because when a child comes home and they make you feel bad for not being as religious as you should be, it can absolutely have the effect of taking you and the whole family back to church.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I was going to get at is just real quickly, I want everyone to realize, like, this documentary hit every single one of like the propaganda ideological features that you should look for when you are being fed propaganda, right? So we talked about selective framing or omission. There's the emotional appeal, right? We've talked about that. Invoking nostalgia, we lost something, fear, society destabilized, that sort of thing. They're the us versus them framing, which is we've talked about too. The portrayal of Christian values is under threat. That any external force, whether it's secularism or public education, bureaucracy, is adversarial when that's not the reality, right? We talked about that as well. Mission-oriented rhetoric, again, they use the crap out of that. So they are not merely descriptive, but prescriptive, showing a path for action, restoring Bible instruction, rather just analyzing the past. That's often how ideological messaging functions. You need to remember that. And then, of course, there's appeal to traditions, which we've talked about, them rewriting history about our country and the history of religion in public schools, and then the moral authority and religious legitimacy. So because it's Christian biblical instruction, it leverages religious moral authority, the truth of the Bible, moral foundation, which may be used to legitimize the program beyond purely its educational grounds. So all of these things you're going to see in really any kind of propaganda if you take the Christianity out of it, right? Wouldn't you agree with that, RJ? Is there anything like big that you noticed that you wrote down that they used that's like a common trope? And we see it all the time. We know it. Reefer Madness, the Nazis, like all kinds of examples of historical famous propaganda that uses these exact things. I mean, the Nazis actually had the slogan, "Make Germany Great Again." Do you guys know that?
Right. Oh, yeah. Propaganda is extremely pervasive in the history of film, so much so that it was even kind of almost legally enforced. For a while, there was actually this thing called the Hays Code that dictated that films had, like narrative films, they had to have very clear good guy and bad guy. The bad guy was not allowed to be a clergyman. There was even in some contexts wherein the ethnicity of the protagonists and antagonists would be dictated. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Propaganda is something, anything that really ultimately tugs on any one or multiples of those things, but while omitting facts or any kind of what's the word, legitimacy to any other frame of reference. And but it is important to keep in mind, in my opinion, that the definition of propaganda could also be kind of a loose thing, because whenever this gets posted to YouTube or whatever, there's going to be comments pop up. They'll say, well, this is propaganda, and they would technically kind of be right. I mean, there's
Absolutely
really,
is. Because and that's something that you also need to understand. The word propaganda has negative connotations, right? That's in my mind, at least, and I think overall. But the word itself is inherently not bad. It is just a fact. It's just a piece of work, a media piece of work, that is portraying a specific ideal or a specific thing, and then it's persuading you, right? It's persuasive writing,
Yeah.
in its own way, but in film or in media or pamphlet
Oh
form,
yeah.
maybe.
Right, because it does go beyond film. Most of my professional experience actually been mostly working in reality television, and one of a show that I worked on, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but it was a reality show on like a rural farm TV network about young people, like like kids coming out of high school, going into college, that were deciding on going to join the military. And I was telling a veteran that I worked on that show, but it was about like military recruitment. His exact words were, "Wow, that's really good propaganda." And if you do talk with people that actually have been in the military, especially one that has any kind of intelligence background to it at all, they'll tell you that our government uses propaganda, not only on us but abroad. Like one of my buddies was IT for the special forces, and he talked about how they would literally use social media. They would like use local news networks to spread messaging in countries that we as a government want to destabilize. So yeah, the media is an extraordinarily powerful medium for propaganda, but it's not just in film and social media as well. And right now it's hugely pervasive. There's hours I could fill about things at the Herzog Foundation, which is one of the funding organizations that LifeWise does, but I don't want to hijack the stream. So
Know that they are masters of propaganda and of manipulation.
masters. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Zach, is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Chris, Doug, you guys have anything that we missed or left out that, really stuck out to you or you think we should touch on?
I just wanted to agree with RJ and everybody else that was talking about the propaganda. And I also came from it from the lens of seeing these kind of middling faith-based programs where they try to hide the faith-based part of it, even though this didn't. And the emotional manipulation there with the testimonials, which kind of got me. I kind of chuckled at that point too. Not when the kid died. That
Right.
really bummed me out. But later on, when the kid was like, "Why didn't you take me to church?" Was because earlier in the film they said that the Bible doesn't address how you feel. And it's like, and then they're using emotional manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Yeah, and they found the one kid in history that was the one that converted the family, essentially. When so much about like what was talked about in religious circles is the idea that the family being saved starts with the parents, and more specifically with the father. That is very much what a lot of evangelical messaging is. Um, and there's also a lot of imagery in the Bible about well, not just in the Bible, but in like evangelical imagery at large about war, like spiritual warfare, or the armor of God, and which in the Bible is all meant to be allegorical, but then gets really taken like to literal even imagery sometimes within Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes along with all of the rhetoric that they're using right now, right? Like the war on secularism and like
Yeah.
or the persecution complex they have and how they are attributing like every bad thing that's ever happened to our lack of religion and
Yeah.
Christianity, of a state religion,
Mhm. Or the whole thing about the Jenga tower, when they were talking about how when you remove the blocks, but you don't put them back. And to me, the idea of equating God and being in the schools as being the blocks, if you try to look at through the argument of someone who is religious, was raised religious, that doesn't hold up, because in the Bible it talks about your house must be built upon the rock. So really, in their metaphor, the God should be the table that the boards are sitting on, not the little blocks that are being removed. And so that's just one of many things that really just does not hold water. Like, even at my most conservative evangelical in my teenage years, I don't know that I would have bought a lot of what was in this movie.
Yeah. And that's why, when John was asking about people, and if, other people saw it and they were going to be like, oh, that's crazy, that's not true. I don't think it's a good thing, right? That it's not designed for like the larger public and people that are on the fence. Like, I'm thankful for that it is so extreme, that it is so zealous, and in its delivery. And I'm hoping, that how fast we are all moving, as far as breaking it down and putting the real information out there, that we can sort of debunk that whole thing. And it's going to be one less tool in their toolbox, right? Because they use their paid for studies, and they use their made up information, and they use their context, or I mean, their facts without context. They use all of that as tools, right? So this propaganda movie is just one more. And if we can like put a crack in it right from the beginning, then that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I even consider this all that zealous, but maybe that's just because of how much further extreme things that I've seen like the last couple years.
Yeah. I think for your average audience, and it really largely depends on where you live, right? Like, you take a bunch of people that are, maybe coastal elites, if you want to call them that, and you go and you show them that, they're gonna be like, what? But us, we've been dealing with this. If anyone who's lived in a small town in Ohio, like, it's nothing. That's nothing. And that, RJ, especially because you're inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Paying attention, you've seen way, way more crazy things than what they present. But I think that's also the scary part too, is that they're trying to make it digestible.
Yes. They were trying to sanitize it a little bit to bring it to the masses a little more. So they were trying to put their best foot forward and show like the cleanest, most fresh face side that they could. And so, yeah, that is the only thing that I do disagree with slightly, is that I don't think this was super zealous or over the top. Because like I can show you examples here.
What I was trying to say is, like, it's so niche, right?
Oh, okay. No. Now I'm with you. Okay.
Yeah, that's, I guess,
nothing new either. I think that's important to figure out. I know Chris and I talked about that before we started. I mean, Chris can elaborate. Nothing they said in there is new.
No.
Right?
No, these were all rehashes of arguments that I've heard a billion times over. Growing up in the church, even at a young age, before there was even a term for Christian nationalism, I was ardently against it, because I was taught so much that the government is such a secular thing. And not in the sense that you should try to force Christianity back into it, but in that it exists in a vacuum from your religion, because when the government tells you to do something, that is you obeying, being an obedient slave or something. And so to try to apply religion to that, like, this is me trying to explain the really weird vacuum that being a libertarian evangelical in the Midwest that also has progressive family can do to a person.
Thank you so much. And I hope we see you all for the next thing that we have. Absolutely. I want them. AU, we're going to be doing a webinar, a panel with AU. So please come watch that. John's going to be a part of it. He put the link in the chat. Yep. So go ahead and please go and do that. That'll be one of our next thing. And I think as a group, as the Secular Education Association, the next big one of these we're going to do is going to be about the curriculum, and we're going to break it down.
Yeah, they didn't talk about the curriculum hardly at all. It's like they mentioned it once.
Yeah.
No, this was a sales pitch.
That was the other thing we didn't touch on at the end. That was the sign up right now. There's a QR code on your screen. Please sign up and donate and do whatever you can. Yeah.
That was the real reason for a screening, in my opinion. Everything else about that movie could have easily been done in a streaming service. They needed people in one place to do that. That release was 100% about just that little sales pitch at the end. Everything else was like the timeshare spiel. Like,
yeah, no, I agree 100%. Like at the beginning, and I said, like, at every one of these, they had someone there with a clipboard and a LifeWise shirt, like, sign your kid up, and so it was very really that's what it, boiled down.
I'm surprised they didn't pass the bucket for money.
Yeah, right.
They just did it digitally. That's all they did.
They do that all the time.
Well done, guys.
We appreciate it so much. Have a good night. And
Thank you,
always, we're
everybody.
available. You can always reach Zach and I. Contact at segulareducationassociation.org. Comes to Zach and I directly. So if you have a question, you have something that comes up later on, feel free to reach out.
Thanks, you guys.
Go follow Doug's
Appreciate
page.
you.
Watch RJ's documentary. You got
Thank
anything to shout out, Chris? Go to school. Stay in school. Bye, guys.